join us on Friday. At Unisa in terms of how we define openness. So for today's session, we have day 2, and we have a further build-up of our conversations from last week, Friday. On the resources section, you will find that Andrea put up some of the key resources, plus we also put up some apologies, colleagues. It seems as though the network is pretty bad in the area where I am. So just a reminder, please use the chat room function for posting your comments and your questions as we go on. Also, we will share the recording of these sessions a little later for Friday's session and today's session. As we begin, I just want to note an apology from Prof. Mashile. He was going to join us this morning for the session, but unfortunately he was called into an interview session to address some interviews or form part of an interview committee. But he passed his welcome to each one of you. He's welcome to Dr. Andrea Inamarato as well. Thanking you for a commitment for the second day and wishing us all well. So from my side, colleagues, just a quick reminder for the program for the day as well. Please have a look at your resource section, and I look forward to a good session as we engage with each other. And finally, let me say a very warm welcome to Andrea. Thank you once again, Andrea, for joining us, and we've had a great session on Friday, and we're looking forward for another good session with you as well. So thank you very much for taking the time and joining us, Andrea. So I now hand over the day to you, Andrea. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tenzu. Good morning, everyone. Can you please confirm you can hear me fine?
You're good to go, Andrea.
Excellent. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be back with you today for a second day of workshop. It was really very rich last Friday, and I'm sure we are going to continue our conversation in the same way today. I hope you had a good rest, a good break over the weekend, and is ready to start sharing with me now. I will start sharing my screen, if I may. Okay, and then if you can confirm to me, you can see my screen, that would be great, please.
You're good, Andrea, I can see it.
Okay, brilliant. So, colleagues, I have left the structure of time allocation for the day in your groups, but I will take now these initial moments of our workshop today to make a recap of the things we discussed last week, and to present some new ideas on open pedagogies and perhaps trends, let's say global trends. This is something I'd like to talk to you today, also based on open pedagogies. And then we are going to kind of replicate a little bit the way we worked last week, which is I'm going to propose something for us to discuss. We will break out in rooms again into 5 groups, and then we'll have reporting, and we'll continue for the second part of the day after a 15-minute break. Okay, so here we go. As I've just said, I will start by making a summary and some reflection on the brainstorming we had last Friday. Then I'm going to zoom into open pedagogies, talking a little bit more of the concepts and perhaps bringing you some examples and exploring the concepts of endogenous and added openness to methodologies. Then, as I've just said, I'd like to look into global trends. And one thing I'd like to briefly talk to you today is about micro-credentials and flexible learning pathways, because they are really cornerstones of open pedagogies, right? And then we have, I propose a brainstorming again, more reflection, and an open mic for group discussion towards the end. Okay, so here we go. Now, when I was analyzing everything that we discussed last week, looking back at the post-its, no, the notes that we had in the mural, and the overall questions in the questions or comments. Actually, we had more comments than questions in the chat room. These were the words that I've started typing together in order to have these word graphic to showcase to us what appeared the most, no, in terms of idea. Interestingly, flexibility is one of the main concepts, right? I remember that I presented to you some examples of openness around the world, no, and showing that there is no single solution, no one size fits all for each organization, each country, each culture. There will be probably a different understanding because of different needs. But I showed you the model of Athabasca University with more choices for entry and for taking exams, etc. So that seemed to be one of the concepts that appeared a few times in our discussion. But flexibility here can be seen in many different ways. No, not only flexibility in terms of entry and deciding on where to take exams, but also flexibility in terms of how to study, of how to get credits for the study that we take. It could be also about learning pathways and having more open pedagogies used to be able to open up and make the learning process more flexible. So I invite everyone to reflect with me today on what flexibility means, since it was one of the main concepts in our brainstorming last Friday, okay? Then, technology was also very much mentioned, and technology as a means to mediate the learning processes, no? And I think this is a beautiful way of putting technology, because it serves the purpose of helping us in the process of facilitating learning, and how we can dive into the technologies that we have today to make learner with more quality. I believe really that nowadays we can really provide quality learning because we have also technologies to tap into. And then, of course, you may argue to me, Andrea, we have restrictions on technology use here in South Africa due to infrastructure, due to bandwidth. So, you know, there are here possibilities for us perhaps to think through and to overcome those barriers using technology. I mean, this is something we should think about the whole, I propose us to think about for the whole day today, how we could first of all use technology to enhance quality, really, and also to think of ways in which we could overcome technological barriers, okay? And then discussion forums, interestingly enough, appeared as another thing, another concept very much used. And I think this is because the way, probably, no, you know better than me, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the way Unisa structures most of the interaction with the students is based on discussion forums, no? And I recall at least a couple of you saying last week that it sometimes does not work because it's very difficult to engage people in discussion forums. No, nowadays society has been evolving, technologies has been evolving, and people are moving away from writing to a more discursive, and by discursive in this particular case, I mean oral, in a more oral way of communicating, no, with each other. So there's a lot of video, a lot of voice, podcasts, and other ways that perhaps we could think of ways to, let's say, provide support to the old known discussion forums, right? In order to enable more collaboration. So this is something else that I invite you to think about today. But then we talked about stakeholders, you know, and how we need to bring them in to be able to support change. We talked about the need to have a mission and policy, and the policy in place. And the key for the policy is that it must be, above all, shared to all and transparent. Everyone needs to understand. First of all, everyone needs to know what the policy on openness is. Otherwise, it's not an open policy. It's just a policy on paper. And secondly, everybody has to have a say on it and understand their role in the implementation of that policy. So transparency, above all, is extremely important, right? It was also beautiful to know that Unisa has many policy documents that we can start tapping into to, first of all, do a checklist of what has been adopted, what needs further adoption. I'm sorry, my phone is ringing here. what needs further adoption. No, so we can scrutinize those documents to start with, to see if they are still valid, if they have clear goals to everyone. And also important is to have measurable goals, not only clear, but it needs to be scaffolded by a strategy with measurable goals. So we need to know who does what, by when, and how to revisit and evaluate the openness process. So it's very important to follow up and evaluate. So starting from those documents, I even saw that it's in our folder now, a policy from the higher level, no, from the top down, from the Ministry of Education in South Africa. And it seems that you have many ways to build a strong discourse for Unisa, even stronger because you already are an open and distance learning education. But in rethinking current practices and thinking for the future, there is really an opportunity to tap into the existing documents, including the active learning framework, to build on a more strategic way, a more strategic approach for openness, should you wish, right? Okay. So to bear in mind about our discussion now, nowadays and since last week, we were discussing about different terminologies, different ways of approaching, and now we come up with this concept of open pedagogy. Then there is the concept of hyperflex learning. There are so many new concepts, micro-credentials, you name it, One thing that we need to remember, particularly the ones that come from the education field, they know it, but perhaps not everybody is very familiar with the fact that in education, terminology evolves as in any field, of science. Terminology takes up new meanings. Sometimes there are really a trend for new fashionable terms, like we started talking about MOOCs, then we started talking about NOOCs and spooks, and there are so many different terms coming to educational practice. Then we need to remember, very few are actually bring something completely new. There is normally a reinvention of techniques and methodologies used in new ways to catch up with our contemporary needs and to accommodate new technologies as they evolve as well. So I really would like us to be more simplistic today and not be really very much caught on describing these different terminologies, but try to understand what they together can perhaps bring to us in terms of tools for us to use in the learning process, teaching and learning process. Okay, so the key here, in my opinion, is to create a minimum shared understanding in which to build upon. So a minimum shared understanding of what openness means to Unisa as an institution, then what it means to us as individuals practitioners. We also need our own definition, because there is a limit as to where we can act open. Now, how open can us be in terms of being an open educator? Now, if you remember, I think that thermometer that I showed you last week, from less open to more open, is something to bear in mind at all times when we are teaching, when we are designing curriculum, when we are designing methodologies, and when we are thinking of policies. There will not be complete openness for everything. Some things will be more open than others, but in order to make policy happen and be implemented into practice, we really need to have a minimum shared understanding of what we mean so that we can build upon it. Okay, so the other thing that is extremely important, and we'll touch upon this today, is that practitioners, educators, in the case of Unisa, the curriculum designers, the facilitators, the teachers, the lecturers, everyone really involved in the teaching and learning process need to know about learning theories. I always say this is absolutely essential, because when you understand about learning theories, you are more able to understand the new methodologies and teaching techniques that arise based on these learning theories, right? So I think it's extremely essential that we revisit, and I think I've mentioned it in my keynote the other week, that we revisit those learning theories so that when we approach curriculum design and teaching or facilitate teaching, we know where to choose from. We have all the options in front of us, and then we decide what's the best technique, the best methodology to use with that particular subject, and then we choose the best technologies to support us. students, right? So as you said, technology to enhance learning, technology as a medium to enhance learning. But it's important that everyone has it very clear in their heads that there are different techniques we could use and we could apply to teach sometimes one single class, but sometimes a whole module or a whole program, okay? Now, what are the challenges? So some research in Europe, as I was just telling you about the need for learning theories. Now, the research in Europe tells us that most lecturers, teachers, facilitators, and tutors have training in their subject area, but not training in teaching, right? So obviously, everyone who is teaching in higher education, you know, they either have a PhD or they are really specialists in their subject knowledge, but this does not make them good teachers, right? This does not mean that they know how to teach or that they understand teaching approaches and teaching methodologies. So when we carried out this research in Europe, we really asked all the interviewees, you know, what they were doing in order to tackle, you know, if there were any policies in place. So some countries actually have a test, you know, you cannot be just good in your subject area. You need to understand a little bit of teaching. And if you pass that test on a country level, then you can become part of public universities as a lecturer. This is just to give you an example. This was not the majority of countries in the EU that did that, and I'm not saying neither that this is the way to go. By no means I'm suggesting that. I'm just saying that in terms of higher level policies, sometimes some countries in Europe really found out that that is a problem. And I wonder whether this is the problem. There may be a problem in South Africa as well. You know, in Brazil, this is certainly the case. And this is why it's so difficult to translate and to transfer what is on the policy documents into practice. Sometimes it's very well written, it's very well explained, but there is a lack of a minimum understanding in terms of teaching methodology to translate that into the teaching practices, right? Now, need to think beyond limitations. I also realized, whilst speaking to you at Unisa, that you have so much richness in terms of your open mission, you know, the mission to reach everyone in Africa, your open entry policies, your mission, no, overall is extremely rich, but there are limitations as well, you know, that I'm sure that this is not new. I'm not preaching anything new for you, but, you know, there are limitations. Some limitations are actually mentioned last week, you know, very concrete, in a concrete way. Someone said, I have 20,000 students in my module. How do I go about it? So now that seems to be a real challenge. And then we need to think beyond those limitations. And I really call upon this particular group of people, a fantastic group, to tap into collective thinking, you know, because collaboration is really key for us to find possible solutions, if not possible to be implemented now, perhaps to be something to be in the new plan for the near future for Unisa. And then access and accessibility, taking into account that there is a difference between access and accessibility. No, accessibility here really meaning those students that have some sort of visual impairment, for example, no, or some more physical disabilities, that sort of thing, right? So for Unisa, since the main mandate is inclusion, there is a need to uptake multiple ways of delivery and multiple ways of engagement. And why do I say multiple ways of engagement? Because it's clear that the discussion forum alone is not really enough to promote collaboration between students. So there is a need to think beyond that. And I think there is a real opportunity for Unisa now. Because as I said before, technology can help us enhance quality. You know, there has never been a better moment in history to count on digital technologies for education, right? Apart from the limitations that I know that are in South Africa. But since you are building on a new system that is open source like Moodle for the university, you could perhaps think of making the most of customizing this Moodle into something that is really useful for your needs. You know, you can add APIs in there, you can have breakout rooms if you want, you can have virtual rooms, open all the time for the students to talk to each other, you know, without they having the need to go outside the controlled environment of the university for security and data protection purposes. So you really could start thinking of ways of using this Moodle platform to really be more open in the sense of promoting collaboration with students beyond discussion forums, okay? Just as we are having now using Teams, you know, so why not try and translate something into that to Moodle, because it's very possible. And then work around the number of students, you know, perhaps by having a rotation on days, rotation on timing, which students can access. I mean, you name it, you are very creative. I'm sure you can go around this. Just as an example, no, of a possibility. Now, learning theories, why are they important? Because they are the scaffolding of teaching and learning methodologies, approaches, and techniques. See, we may be talking about methodologies. Sometimes we talk about approaches. Sometimes we talk about techniques. I want to be very simplistic today, as I said before. We could, but there's no time to engage in a philosophical discussion on the meaning of each word, of each terminology and their differences, etc. So I take the methodologies as a way of applying the learning theories. So methodologies and approaches, I'm going to be using these terms interchangeably today, but techniques for me is something a bit more specific, you know, like peer instruction for me is more of a technique, you know, because there is a way of doing it, a specific way of doing it, right? So to me, that's more of a technique. And you can think, for example, in terms of learning theories, behaviorism versus social constructivism, because most of our university study or courses, etc., traditionally has been built on a behaviorist perspective, which has the teacher, as the holder of the knowledge, the one that transmits the knowledge to the student. And that's the famous concept that is called the banking concept of education, developed by Paulo Freire, the Brazilian Paulo Freire. It's that idea that we can deposit in the heads of the students the knowledge they need to know. And I ask you, to what extent are we not trying to do this with the current methodologies that you have at Unisa? Is it a problem? Well, we have learned so far, quite a few of us have been brought up in a behaviorist system, but is this what we want to head to for the future of our kids, of our students, of our society? So there is a value in behaviorism, but, as you know, there are different ways of approaching learning. And then we have a social constructivist perspective. So you have a cognitive perspective, you have many learning theories. So unfortunately, there's no time to go through learning theories today. But on a more social constructivist perspective, we are talking about Vygotsky, we are talking about the co-creation of knowledge. So in behaviorism, we have expected response, which is learning. I teach you and you learn it, right? In a social constructivist perspective is I help you learn, I facilitate your learning, and we co-create the knowledge together. Okay, and this is where open is coming, because when we co-create, first of all, we are already being open. This is a more open process, where everybody participates and collaborate. Collaborate is a key word for openness, but also in terms of sharing. And then we can decide how open we want to be in sharing. If we want to sharing that knowledge produced in that particular class, in that particular module, only amongst the students, or whether we can leave it open to the world, right, to take advantage of it. And this is where the role of licenses come in. This is where the role of having a platform to share content comes in, and above all, a platform to experiment with, like a laboratory where people can exchange practices without being afraid of making mistakes. I think this is the first step that Unisa should think about, having a lab space, and we'll talk about it a bit more later on. So methodologies, approaches, and techniques, as I just said, they are the how we support the teaching and learning. They can be used in a single lesson or throughout a module. So you can be using a mix of these techniques or approaches throughout your module. And as you design the curriculum, you should perhaps have these things in mind, as I said, so you are able to pick from option 1, 2, 3, 4 in a single module, in a single class. I'm not sure exactly how you divide your module, but I believe you have course materials, and I always say that the course materials, we teach through the course materials as well. So the way you design the course materials, the way you embed that didactic into the course material can be already by taking into consideration how then the facilitator can work with all these approaches and techniques afterwards to make their lives easier, of course, no? So you can think of peer instruction for a specific concept, for example, that you want to teach, but then you may decide to take a project-based approach for the entire model, you know, in which the final product of this model could become an OER if you ask the students for permission to put it online. You know, this may be a brilliant experience because they'll look after this final product of their learning, no? And therefore you can open that to the world or not. It depends very much if the students agree on that openness or not. So it's always a negotiated process, no? And this is why it's so important to know a variety of methodologies and a variety of techniques that you can pick and choose and decide what is the most appropriate for your context or even for your specific situation, right? Okay, so here we go. I'm going to give you a brief example of what can be active methodologies, no? So you have active learning and open pedagogies go hand in hand. So something for us to think of, which means that Unisa already is on the way for open pedagogies. But as I said before, there is a different name to it. And the difference here is that we add a level of openness, no? So open pedagogies are all based on collaboration, on that social constructivist perspective. So that's where we are coming from, right? And the way I describe it, an active methodology for active learning, is a way in which the students, we really take them out of their comfort zones and make them take up different roles. You know, they may be in peer instruction, they may be teaching. So yeah, they are the teacher, they are teaching their colleagues a concept they've learned, or they are co-creating that knowledge, or they become a team leader, they become the author of OER, of open educational resources. They know that the product of that class can be and will be published as an open educational resource, for example. No, they can act as reviewers, as presenters, as researchers in a flipped classroom, for example, methodology or approach. No, so there you go. There are so many possibilities and varieties in there for us to practice active learning, which is in the active learning framework of Unisa. And then we have to think, we have to be able to name some of them. No, so for example, e-portfolio. E-portfolio is a fantastic type of, not necessarily only assessment, because we can use e-portfolio throughout the teaching and learning process, no, and make the assessment as part of the learning process. This is important, no? And that portfolio that you ask your students to create in one way or another, using the internet or not, it can actually be made available to the public if they decided to have a blog, for example, in which they kind of with specific rubrics, no, throughout a module. The final goal is to make that portfolio open to everybody and go to my Unisa, or just remain open in the lab space as a student production. There are so many ways of working with portfolios, no? And portfolios is a good example of how open pedagogy can be, and how we can perhaps foster not only individual engagement with technologies and society and reflection, but also grew in groups, right? So a portfolio can be individual, normally it's individual, but we can think of it as a group as well. Project-based, as you already know. Problem-based, which is a very specific technique. It has to have, pardon me, there has to be a lot of thinking to design a good problem-based class, okay? And because then you choose a problem in which you have to lead all the students to reach the conclusions to that, the similar conclusions to that problem, right? It's not open, not as open as other techniques. We have design thinking, we have flipped classroom, and we have personalized learning. So just examples of active learning approaches, okay? And as I present them to you, I just would like you to think individually whether you know exactly how to use ePortfolio as a technique in your teaching, in your day-to-day activities. And when I say teaching, understand it as the facilitation of learning, okay? I'm just going for the simplistic way of saying teaching, right? Do you know exactly what project-based is about, or in the difference between project-based and problem-based? Do you know what design thinking is? Flipped classroom is perhaps the more simpler, no? And personalized learning, how could you go about personalized learning when you have so many students at Unisa? And this is why I said they are all based on social constructivist theories, right? But when it comes to methodologies and techniques, they have their specific way of being applied that, of course, we can adapt, but we need to know the minimum in order to be able to use them. And the class, the video I made available for you on peer instruction is just an example to you, showing that sometimes we use this terminology, no? And we think, oh, it's just about getting people to speak to each other. No, there is actually a technique to apply peer instruction. You may use it or you may not, but you must know that there is a technique, you know. And in that particular class, I talk about the concept test. I talk about how you can evaluate the percentages of students that learned the subject, or, you know, if they are between 30 and 70%, then you can apply the peer instruction. So it was born with a rationale behind it. And my question is, do you know the rationale for all these active learning methodologies, or at least for a handful of them, let's say 5 or 6 that you can pick and choose from, both for curriculum design and for teaching? Personally, I consider this something very important if it is to translate policy into practice, okay? Now, open pedagogies. I have described the open pedagogies in 2 ways, right? This is my description. You're probably not going to find it in literature, but the way I look at them is by seeing if they are endogenous openness, if the openness is something endogenous to those methodologies, or if it's something that we have to add onto a specific methodology. On top of that methodology, we can add a level of openness, okay? Now, it's blurred. There are no fixed boundaries for endogenous and added openness, okay? Sometimes you find, you kind of think, okay, this could be added or this could be endogenous. No fixed boundaries here, okay? But just as a way for us to think through very briefly, nowadays, there is a whole line of thinking towards learning through open data. Open data is becoming a big thing, you know, and open data, open source technologies, and open data is the scientific production that we have also, no? Open science also, no? As a scientific production of universities. So how can we teach students using the science we produce, you know, worldwide? Is it beneficial? Because we would be teaching with real world problems, you know, you would be teaching with the latest in science. So learning through open data and open science has something about endogenous openness. It's open from the beginning, you know, from the creation of that knowledge to make it available in an open repository for everyone to use. Micro-credentials for learning as well, no, because the concept of micro-credentials I'll tell you a bit more later. It's designed for more openness, to add a level of openness to higher education, learning pathways, how the students can decide by themselves how to go about their learning, obviously always with the help of the institution. So how can the institution support that sort of openness, endogenous openness, and connected learning, you know, as per the connectivism approach for MOOCs, etc. Now, how can we be connected? Now, added openness. In peer instruction was not really designed to be as open, no, as, for example, connected learning. But could we add a level of openness to that sort of methodology? How can we make discussion forums more open? Really? So, because since this is the basis of Unisa methodology, there will be cases in which we are going to have to add a level of openness onto existing practices in order to lead us as time goes by and we plan for new courses for more endogenous openness processes, right? So if every course is only revisited every 3 years, perhaps you should not wait for 3 years to have embedded endogenous methodology, open methodologies in there. And we could start thinking as to how we can be more open coming from what we have now, okay? Project-based learning and e-portfolios, as I said before, it's very blurred whether it's endogenous openness or whether we have to add openness onto those techniques. But in any case, we can make a project-based learning strategy very closed if you want to, or very open if you want to. We can make a portfolio very closed if you want to, or very open if you want to. So this is very much a choice, in the negotiated choice between the institution, the instructors, the teachers, facilitators, and the students and the community. So collaboration is key here. This is why I insist that this is a negotiated action, right? And I'm bringing you some examples as well. When we talk about open pedagogies, this is called open pedagogy notebook. So if you Google it later, you will find this, okay? And you can browse through. This is a shared space for people to submit their open pedagogy practices, because you need to see from another teacher, another lecturer, another curriculum designer, what you can do with existing methodologies and existing learning approach to make them more open, whether this is an endogenous type of openness or an added level of openness. But it's always important to have a place to share, okay? And this is why I think Unisa could perhaps thinking of having, even if it's to share initially amongst the staff, you know, a place to share. Now, to share pedagogies, to share resources that have not been through quality control yet, to share student resources, a place that is more informal, that people can feel comfortable to collaborate with one another, to create with one another, and maybe from there to transfer this knowledge to a more, let's say, controlled environment, quality controlled, so on and so forth. But a place to share is really important, no? So I invite you to have a look at this Open Pedagogy Notebook as soon as you have a chance to have some inspiration on open pedagogies throughout the world. For example, as you know very well, the Open University, the British Open University has the Open Learn project. I particularly talk a lot about it because I used to work for this project back in 2006. They still have, although this platform has changed a lot over time, I even left a research report in your references in our group, in Teams, of the first years of this Open Learn platform, in which they discussed this concept of learning space and lab space. It's in there for you to have a look, right? And it has evolved over time, but the main concept is here, in which there is an open space, in the case of the OU UK, not only a controlled environment open for the staff only, no, it's open to the world, okay? So you can create a course, you can access courses, you can share your ideas openly. And when people look at it, they know this is a production created by the world. So there is not really why to think, oh, this is going to impact our reputation. It's clear that it's a laboratory open, no? So something to think about. Now, very briefly, 5 minutes on micro-credentials and learning pathways. I'm going 5 minutes behind schedule, but I hope we can catch up later. Now, we are thinking of the present and the future now. Now, the second part of my talk now is really about global trends, okay? And why do I want to focus on micro-credentials and learning pathways? Because there's so much of open pedagogies that can be used via micro-credentials and via learning pathways. So to me, these are endogenous openings. These are ways of teaching and learning and promoting credentials and assessment. You see, it's a combination, it's a pack of everything that really has this endogenous openness concept to it, right? And it's all about innovation. So I want to share with you that last week I took part on an international webinar in which there were more than 1,000 people participating from all over the world, okay, on micro-credentials. And I want to share with you the main results, the main concepts discussed in this workshop. So, status of micro-credentials adoption. So everybody voted in there. There were questions and everybody voted, okay? So 65% of people participating in that webinar believe that micro-credentials is something emerging, okay? Then some of them, do we have micro-credentials policy in place? 30% said probably not. Another 33% said definitely not. And I ask you, Nisa, try and answer those questions for yourself, okay? Do you have any micro-credential policy in place? So if you don't, you are really in agreement with the 60%, 63% of people, no? That actually probably not or definitely not yet have a policy in place. Now, micro-credentials will be integrated into degree programs. 41% strongly agree and 41% agree, meaning that 82% of those participants, and they were thought leaders in higher education, okay? 82% of thought leaders in trends and global trends in higher education believe that micro-credentials will be integrated into degree programs. Then, top barrier, the status of the recognition of these micro-credentials, we still do not know how to go about a student that comes to us, knocks in the door of the university and says, look, I have this MOOC here, this credential for this micro course, for this Google course that I took. We still do not know how to deal with this. So status of their recognition and their quality assurance are the barriers, and these are the things that we need to think beyond the limitations, as I said before. We need to think through. Time frame for mainstreaming. By 2025, 38% of those people in the webinar, of the thought leaders, believe that by 2025, this is going to be mainstream already, and by 2030, another 39%, meaning that 77% altogether believe that it will be mainstreamed, if not before, by 2030, right? And only 12% believe that it will never be mainstreamed, okay? And 11% believed that it would be even sooner, which is a real challenge, but in 1 to 2 years' time. So this is some food for thought for you, okay? This is really something to be, I think that Unisa should contemplate when revisiting the openness aspect, when revisiting this mission of becoming the lead university in Africa with open policies, with openness as mission. What's the role of micro-credentials for you? You may decide not to go for it, but if you decide not to go for it, you need to have an informed decision. This needs to be an informed decision. You need to know why micro-credentials is not for you. That's the very minimum I think Unisa must do, okay? So very briefly, the scenarios for micro-credentials, I mean, this comes from other sorts of research that this company put together in this way. So if you look at the first quadrants in there, the blue one, it's a scenario in which people will not believe on micro-credentials. They think that this is never gonna pick up, then the number two is that it's going to replace current models, that traditional education will no longer exist, and that we are going to go for micro-credentials only, which is a bit of an extremist view, but it's there presented as a possible scenario. Some people do believe in that, okay? Number 3, the yellow one, believe that only professional associations and the industry will go for micro-credentials, like, for example, Google, MOOCs, LinkedIn courses, all these courses that people tend to think that are competing with higher education, that micro-credentials will work only for them. Do you really think this is the case? And then in number 4, marketplace. Now, this was voted as the most probable scenario for micro-credentials in the future, meaning that not only the industry, the services that I've just cited, but also universities, and other post-secondary education institutions will tap into the power of micro-credentials. So how can the university catch up on this? No? Now, micro-credentials and learning pathways. Let's think a little bit on micro-credentials. How do you design courses for micro-credentials? Do you know? You curriculum designers, which framework to be adopted? Because if everyone devises something completely different, how can these micro-credentials be trusted and be used to build on courses and degrees and diplomas? We need to think about all those things, no? What's the role of badges and blockchain? There's no time to talk about blockchain today, unfortunately, but I left in your resources a report on blockchain in education and the role it has, and I think that for Africa in general, this could be a way forward as well, right? And how open can micro-credentials be? So you see, this is another level of openness, not in a more macro level. When you have a strategy, an institutional strategy towards micro-credentials, then you have openness coming through the strategy, the macro strategy to the micro, to the actual methodologies, teaching methodologies. Then, in terms of learning pathways, as I said, micro-credentials and learning pathways go hand in hand. How to design learning pathways? Curriculum designers. Do you know? How can micro-credentials be used in learning pathways? How to empower students for self-regulated learning in this scenario? Openness, someone asked this question, isn't openness about empowering students for self-regulated learning? Yes, it's also that. So there you go. And how can Unisa provide support to students and open learners in this scenario in which you would probably have learning pathways? So thank you for bearing with me for this presentation. And now I invite you to go to the breakout rooms to discuss this main question. Just one question today to make it easier, right? How do you foresee the future of ODL, open and distance learning at Unisa? And what is the role of open pedagogies? How do you foresee the future of Odell at Unisa? And what is the role of open pedagogies? So here we go. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I hand over to you.
Okay, the classes are being opened at the moment. Andrea, I'm going to assign you to group 4 for this one.
Absolutely fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. So again, we are forced to Hello. Hello. Welcome back, everyone. Are we all back?
Thank you.
Hi. Yes.
Hi. I'm sorry, some of you were just starting to asking a question and we were cut off. Apologies for that. This is automatic. This is done automatically. But anyway, I propose that we follow the methodology of last week, 10 minutes for reporting per group. And today, instead of starting with group number 5, we are going to follow the natural order. We are going to go from 1 to 5. So can group 1 report first, please? And then group 2, then we have a break, and then group 3, 4, and 5. So group 1, please.
Thank you. I hope we got the scope right of what we were supposed to do. And I will just share the content of the mural that we've created. So we centered our discussion starting on micro-credentials and micro-badges. And we kind of had this idea of that it's a really interesting idea. And it's great that it could get into policy, but we also thought, we need to think about micro badges and micro credentialings in terms of layers. It's not quite a straight one-on-one for you've done this micro badge or micro credential, and therefore you will get access to this course or this degree, for example. But what we did say, where there's potential for us as Unisa, is to act, for example, as a accrediting body, which is what Unisa started out in, 150 years ago. And could we fill this role of accreditation body again? And then we also had a discussion about whether there's a need for different streams of courses to be developed around micro-credentials ourselves, so that we offer micro-credentials, and how would we go about developing that? So that was kind of one aspect of our discussion. And then we had a long discussion about open pedagogies and what we could get out of it, or how we could use it for as a better expression, maybe. And we really thought about, okay, there's all sorts of new opportunities when we, for example, develop new programs, as somebody was using the example for the Bachelor of Theology that's currently being developed. But we need to have space and chance to develop our teaching, our knowledge of pedagogies and how we could use that. And often there's a time issue that is constraining, in that we are unfortunately that we don't have the time to experiment because our daily lives are so busy. And what we need to do is we have to be creative in our pedagogies, but for that we need headspace. And we've thought that, one way of creating this headspace is to have communities of practice. We share with one another what we are doing, and I think, unfortunately, quite often we don't have that. We're not sharing with one another of what works and what could not work. We talked a bit about having students build portfolios for life or for skills, rather than having assignments that is throwaway assignments, that we could think of ways to get our students to develop something that they can take with them and show, as, for example, when they're applying for work, and show what skills they've developed throughout their careers. And I think one of the things that we said is it's really important that we shouldn't underestimate our students. And often when we give them these moments to express themselves. They come up with really amazing work. But again, we need to think about what level students are at. And the other thing is about scalability. You know, what you can do with a group of 50 versus 6,000 is very different. And we thought maybe one of the ways to get past that is to look at things like peer review. And we were having a bit of a discussion about how to practically implement these things, and then make sure that there's consistency if you're using peer review in a class, so that that someone is not overly strict or not strict. But we came to the conclusion that openness can lead to pedagogical freedom for us and our students. And I think I will pause there. And hopefully, if I've left something out, my group can come on board here as well.
Exactly. Thank you very much. A very clear presentation. Yes, we still have 5 minutes for group 1. I do not know if anybody from the group wants to jump in, or anybody from outside the group. The group first, anyone? Apparently not. Does anybody else want to jump in and make a comment on group 1? Because if not, I can comment in terms of what you mentioned about, I think you mentioned interesting things. When discussing open pedagogies, we must never forget that it's not only about active learning, but also about sharing. Sharing is at the core of openness, no? And so your suggestion to think of portfolios that can be used for the student career, to show employers is fantastic, and it's also aligned with micro-credentials, because the whole context nowadays is that universities are coming to realize they cannot afford anymore to offer a 4 or 5 year degree and leave the students during that amount of time without any credit or certificate or accreditation that they could show to an employer to enable them get through the job market sooner. So people need to get into the job market sooner, but also need to reskill and upskill more often than before. This is how our society is heading nowadays. Now, for more need for upskilling and reskilling constantly. So micro credentials can allow that jump, from and from the school, from the university into the job market and back, and so on and so forth. So the portfolio there really has a social purpose, and so the sharing of the portfolio is something really important. Open communities of practice, fantastic idea, and the peer review for students to be more involved, also a very nice standing out idea from group 1. Any more comments?
Andrea, my hand is up.
Sorry, I didn't see your hand up because I can only see the mural of group 1. But now I can see. Okay, Florence, go ahead, please. Sorry.
Yeah, this is a question directed to you. Micro credentials. The Open University UK allows for open admission, meaning you can get in there without you having, let's say, grade 12 in our language. And how is that open access where you can register for a course without a prerequisite or requirements for that with macro credentials? Can that be offered without us requiring that the child must have grade 12 pass?
Thanks for your question, Florence. I'm not sure I understood it, but I'll try and answer, and if not, please let me know, okay? And I will reformulate it to address your question. The policy of open entry at the Open University UK is ever existing. Even before we were talking about micro credentials, which is something more recent. Let's say it dates of at the OU, it dates of like 3 or 4 years ago only. The concept of open entry has always been there. I, for example, am an example of entry. Although I had all the diplomas, you know, when I started my PhD at SBOU UK, I remember the first day I arrived there for my interview to see if I would get a studentship. I arrived there with a kind of a suitcase, full of diplomas and certificates to show them that I had completed all the formal education pathways, right? Translated into English for the courses I did in Brazil. It was an amazing, an awful lot of documents, but nobody asked me anything. And I was really surprised at the time. I was actually even disappointed because I had spent so much time and money on, recognizing, translating those documents, finding equivalents, into the UK, etc. And nobody asked me for anything. So basically, the idea is that if you have a certain age, you are allowed to study that degree. And the process of, it's by the process of supported open learning that you start helping that learner that enters with no barriers to enter, but then it's a kind of funnel, you guide them through the process to acquire or to develop, not acquire, to develop the necessary skills to be able to come out the other side with the same or even better skills that someone who had entered with qualifications before would do or would achieve, So I think the power of the open entry is that it has to have a very well-designed, supported open learning throughout the process for the other side of the funnel when you finish, okay? So I think that's the main idea. So no, the thing is they do not ask for any diplomas or qualifications in advance. So a micro-credential is not necessary either for the majority of courses, right? Now, if we're talking about a PhD, a master's, there may be different policies depending on the level you want to enter, no? But as I explained to you, for my PhD, when I started there, nobody asked me for anything. So I'm speaking by experience. And for micro-credentials, they have been developing many experiments with micro-credentials and micro-credentials with blockchain. One of the experiments, I'm going to put also in your resources a chapter that I've written about the Open University's experience with micro-credentials. I have not put that reporting in the folder, but I will. They have been doing experiments with their Open Learn platform in which people will take a short course, will get a badge, will get a micro-credential, and they would link those micro-credentials to employment agencies. So the employment agencies have some profiles described of the types of job seekers they are after, for the vacancies they have available. So whenever someone gets a badge and a micro-credential that matches with the job descriptions from the employment agencies, that student would be immediately contacted by the agency. So the university is facilitating, the transition from the university to the job market by using micro-credentials. So I'm going to put that example for you. It's in the blockchain, in the newest blockchain report we published at the commission. I'll leave it there for you to read through if you're interested. Okay? I'm not sure, Florence, if I answered. Let me know, please.
I think you did. I think you did. It's gonna be obviously the issue of open entry as long as you produce the proof that you've finished that certificate. Yeah, you answered it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move to group number 2, please.
Thank you. Group number 2. Let me see. I hope you can see the murals, or rather the sticky notes. We had a discussion around the two aspects of that question, and we tried to sort of distribute them according to what we thought belonged to the first part or the second part. But we started off by acknowledging that Unisa is on track as far as the ODL aspect is concerned, but we haven't yet transcended into the ODEL that we envision to be. But the move is there already, and we can even see with these workshops that there's really a serious move for capacitating of the Unisa staff, in this case the academics, so that they are empowered to at least begin the journey into the future. But we also talked of student expectations and how rapidly they could be changing, and more recently during the COVID-19 situation, where Unisa, much as was able to provide students with a digital platform to conduct the examinations, but that is too rigid because students were all forced to do their examinations online. So there's a need for some form of diversity to accommodate those who may still not have the type of access that is required for total online learning. We also thought the issues relating to the platform, the discussion forum being the main and almost the only student engagement platform that platforms such as Telegrams and WhatsApp could also be used. I know that there may be in some quarters some experimentation or other academics already using it in one way or the other, but it's not widespread and it's not something that is done almost as a constant for the university academic space. And I'm going to just touch on one thing here, and I'll let others join in. The issues of principles for effective pedagogies. We thought that they should be or are inclusive. They could forge motivation for student engagement. In particular, quality assurance would also assist with the standardization and consistency of application across, that the process would then be transparent, and open pedagogies also allow for innovative approaches to be integrated into the teaching and the learning environment. Let me stop there and ask Suri perhaps to come in.
Thank you, Rashidi. Thank you for making the slide bigger. I think I want to see the first slide, Rashidi. Yeah. Look in. No. Sorry, the first purple slide. There we go. Thank you, colleagues. Look, I think we were very limited in terms of membership, so we just pulled things together, and any member is welcome to come on board as we talk. Personally, I think the first point is mine. I feel that the overreaching arch of possibilities is very clear within Unisa towards the move to ODEL, but underlying this is the constricted domains to put theory into practice. I think very often, and particularly with COVID-19, we saw the logistic difficulties and challenges between a somewhat asynchronous approach to dealing with ODEL, because some of our students were left in the dark, and therefore we had a kind of backlog of students who couldn't cope, and policies were put in as we moved along, and understandably so. I'm not faulting Unisa. We're not faulting Unisa on that. We learn through experimentation. But what really gets to us is the thing that, there is an acceptable avenue for open pedagogies in the same module. And this depends largely in terms of, please move the slide up, Rashidi. Thank you. That the role of open pedagogies is particularly important with the fourth industrial revolution. But the problem lies, thank you, just stop there. The problem lies with the overemphasis on the use of technology without due consideration for the alternative printed material for students without access. Unfortunately, this was on the back foot, and many students struggle in terms of examinations. And then we have the experiential learning is very, very important when it comes to open pedagogies. On the last speaker, I thought we'd just talk a bit about, there is recognition for relevant previous knowledges in Unisa to allow students who have studied at another university to show compatibility and transferability, which is a good sign. But very often there is that gray area in terms of compatibility between the different qualifications and modules across the tertiary institutions, which poses a challenge for the student who applies with relevant previous knowledge. And then, of course, I just want you to move one up, Rashidi. Sorry, one block up, yes. In terms of the development of curriculum studies, I'm not sure, we were talking about open content. Unisa has its copyright issues, which becomes a problem in dealing with that barrier. I might be naive about the copyright issues, but as I see it, everything is copyrighted to Unisa. Even the people who developed the thing, the copyright is handed over to Unisa. Down, Rashidi, thank you. And then we want to talk about, of course, advantages is that we kind of develop study material that minimize the cost of textbooks and open access to resources. But I think the key area, down again, please. I think there's two more. No?
No.
Okay, let me talk this through. We just feel that the capacity within teams, module teams, needs to be looked at very, very seriously in servicing our students in terms of technical skills as well as open pedagogies. We find that sometimes there's an imbalance or inequity in terms of technical staff and academic staff within some modules. The other thing that we should bear in mind, and I like that point that the previous speaker spoke about and you brought to the foreground, was that, it's not necessary that you have the the expertise in a particular subject matter. I think we need to revisit the skills required to teach our students in an open ODEL environment. I'm going to leave it there. I don't know if there's anyone else in the team would like to pitch in, because some of you left for urgent matters. So we might have misrepresented you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Group 2. Anyone else from Group 2 would like to add anything? I take this as a no for the moment. We just have a couple of minutes before we break for the coffee break. I just would like to highlight a couple of things that Group 2 shared. We've been sharing very, very rich information. Thank you very much, Group number 2. I just wanted to make a comment on the print-based aspect that you've brought up. This is very important, actually. And personally, this is my personal belief, right? I think Unisa is doing right not to abandon the print-based model or the possibility for people to have the printed materials if they have connectivity issues. In fact, the Open University UK a few years ago also went through the same discussions as you are having and concluded that if they were to be a really inclusive university, although they were moving towards the e-pedagogy, electronic-based, they would not abandon the print-based materials in order to be able to include everyone. So the decision was not to be entirely online only, it was to have that backup from print-based materials. This is from one hand. On the other hand, I think the other side of the coin in there is that it's probably important for Unisa not to benchmark innovation with low bars. If the higher you can go with benchmarking innovation at Unisa and working on catching up, the better. This is a personal view, because innovation really flows, and this catching up happens naturally, organically. So yeah, so these are the two comments I had to make on the group 2 presentation. So we now break until 1 o'clock your time. We have 10 minutes for a break, for a coffee, and we come back for group 3 reporting, okay? Thanks very much, everyone. See you in a minute. Hello, everyone. It's 1 o'clock sharp. We are resuming. I hope you had a chance to get your cup of coffee. I do have mine here as usual. And let's return. So how about group number 3? Could you please share with us your insights? Thank you.
I apologize. I couldn't find the button to unmute myself. Can you see my screen? Let me just close that.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. So unfortunately, it's me again. It's Elna again doing the summary for day 2 because our group was thinned out considerably and everybody wanted me to do it. So it's me again. Okay, and you can see we had a lot of fun. We tried to do it in 2 colors, the purple and the blue, and then some of the issues that we came up with is actually answering both questions because we felt that the question posed was actually 2 questions, the future of ODL and then the role of open pedagogy. So in terms of the future of ODL, and there's an interesting thing that happened because this principles of effective pedagogy and advantages was posted by Shamila, and then she accidentally posted it in group 2 as well. I don't know if you guys saw that. Very funny. Okay, so back to group 3. So we said that in terms of the future of ODL, first and closer to the future now, we will use existing learning theories in our LMS because we have to use the LMS, we can't go out. And then hopefully in future, we will get to micro-credentials and other platforms. And what we need now is we need more flexibility in terms of exams, but also find flexible ways to support students without electricity and internet. And unfortunately, that is a truth for us. We do have students, and just to say, well, fine, that's unfortunate. So we're running with a 98% of students that do have access to electricity and internet is unfair. We really need, in terms of openness, to have that, and we have technologies. It's the same as using a pencil instead of a pen. We have technologies that have been working, so we can use that, and the previous group also touched on that. We can still use printed materials, and a student can still study by candlelight if they have to, but we need to find flexible ways of helping them. And then Bhutto came up with 2 things. He said there will probably be some resistance once COVID lockdown is over, and specifically probably because of technologies, access, internet, those kind of things, although he specified that also that he thinks students will still take more and more advantage of ODL in future because the average student at Unisa are becoming younger. In the past, our average student was like in the 30s, 40s, and now we're definitely having younger students, and they like the online, they like the ODL. And I'll get to the creativity later. So the one thing that also came up is that academics need less restrictions regarding the LMS so that they can use other platforms, for instance, to employ different pedagogies, and just to restrict academics to the LMS is actually restricting openness. So they can't use all the platforms. And then different types of different types of interactions. I apologize for that. Let me just put my teeth back. Would assist in facilitating content, and that is a truth, and it came up in the other groups as well. So then the yellow sticky notes are basically answering both questions. So the principles of effective pedagogy: inclusion, motivation, quality assurance, consistency, transparency, innovation. That all came up in the previous groups because Shamila actually posted it in group 2 as well. And then Lydia said micro-credentials is a fantastic way of openness, but it can also be an additional source of income, just like SLP, short learning programs, are at the moment. So we can do this. Unisa should investigate this as additional source of income, and it doesn't need to replace what we have. It can add to what we have. And then obviously training. So only if you want open pedagogies, if you want an open university, if you want to open students' minds, you need open-minded academics. So lecturers should be continuously trained on ODL and make sure that they're globally on par with their peers. And training will also help them to assess active learning. So training came out very strong in our group as something that Unisa need to look at. Then the role of open pedagogy. So in terms of what Shamila said, there's a lot of advantages. So making education more active, eliminating textbook, access to resources, reusing, revising, free distribution. So there's a lot of advantages to open pedagogies. And then the one thing that we also discussed quite a bit was the repurposing of existing resources. So not only running to new technologies and new resources, but repurpose what we have and make sure that we don't leave students behind. So help students to find creative ways of helping themselves. And that's something that you will find everywhere in the world, that students are extremely creative in solving problems, in solving their own problems, but they do need help. And we can't supply electricity, we can't supply the internet. But maybe what we can do is we can work together, and here the environmental scientist is coming out. So how about we help students get access to solar energy? There is electricity, there is, so, you know, those kind of things. And then the one thing that we also said is open pedagogy will definitely help and support us to have more individualized teaching and learning. So you will be able, if you balanced, whoops, there's a spelling mistake, apologies for that. If we have a properly balanced synchronous, asynchronous offering, we will be able to really help and individualize teaching for students. So then you will have the one that loves the online, runs with the online, as well as the one without electricity, and you can support all of them. Okay, and I hope my group, I hope I didn't forget anything, and my group can add to this. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Hi, thank you. I'd just like to add one point that we also spoke about was the development of resources. When it comes to synchronous resources, we should also think about offering them also as asynchronous for those who cannot, who do not have the means to join the live sessions. We should offer both options just to include those who are struggling with connectivity issues.
Thank you. Anyone else from group 3? Well, if not, I'll just make a comment, if I may. Thank you, group 3, for sharing brilliant insights. Also, all of the groups so far have been sharing a lot of richness, insightful ideas, rich insightful ideas. Thank you very much indeed. I wanted to mention a couple of things that you said as a group that really, I think, should be really highlighted. That restricting academics to the LMS is restricting openness. Absolutely. Okay. So this is something to be noted down. There is a need to explore other technologies, social media. There's a lot happening in the open. And how can this open be used in a safe way is perhaps something Unisa could could contemplate a bit further, no, beyond the LMS. The students have a life beyond the LMS of the institution, and they can use that for learning purposes as well. About micro-credentials, not replacing, but adding to what you have, fantastic. I think this seems to be the way to go. In that quadrant I showed you before with scenarios for micro-credentials, this is one of the strong scenarios, you know, as an option that could push the university towards global trends and being competitive and be leading in Africa. So these are things to think about and to build upon what you already have, because Unisa has lots. And also the need for constant training. That's extremely important. I just want to use 1 minute to mention one thing about teaching with OER. I remember that some of you, when applying for this workshop, said, oh, I want to learn how to teach with OER. And I think that's the first concept that we discussed, you know, that open education, openness goes way beyond OER, that it needs a strategy from top down and bottom up, that it's not only about methodologies, but also about institutional strategies, so on and so forth. So I hope that has opened up your minds a little bit in relation to open education and open educational resources. But with regards to OER, just to address that comment, I think that we teach with OER in a very similar way as we would teach with any other content, except that this content is more open in the sense that it can be repurposed. So group 3 also picked up in repurposing, right? So this is one of the strengths of open educational resources, to make it available to be repurposed, not only inside the university, but outside as well. Therefore, raising reputation of the university, opening up access to knowledge that is built within the university, so on and so forth. So this is something to think about, you know, is how we use OER and how we build and share it back to the community. To me, this is essential. That when you talk about the 5 R's of OER, one of them is redistribution, because we can search for and use OER inside and outside the institution, but also put it back on the commons, right? So to me, that's the main principle. And it's not really only about teaching using OER. It's more about a change of mindset, that the more we can produce OER, the better to achieve openness. Okay, so now we go for group number 4, please.
Salosh, I think your mic is muted.
Andrea, I'm not sure if you want to go to group 5 and then come back while Salosh gets sorted.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Okay, so let's go for group number 5 then, please. Who is that? Is that group 4 or 5 on the screen right now? Who is sharing the screen on role of Pedagogies, please?
That is still group 4.
Perfect. So group 4, please. Thank you.
Okay, greetings. I'm going to present the second portion of Group 4, the role of open pedagogies. As a group, we brainstorm on this issue, and we say it fosters collaborative learning, and it actually deepens. Okay, can I have the side of the role of open pedagogies, please? Yes, yeah. Yeah, then it fosters the critical thinking and more of reflective learning on the side of the learner. And we also said this needs to change from the high school, because at the moment what we're observing is we are still using the behaviorism theory in terms of teaching in the high schools, and then we are now bombarded into making this learner now to adopt a constructivism way of learning, which can be a bit not easy. But we acknowledge that open pedagogies foster that reflective learning, critical thinking on the part of the learner. And it also foster andragogy, where it teaches one adult learner to be more independent and self-driven as well. And we also said it also fosters heterogogy, which is self-determined learning or self-driven learning. And the students are able to self-regulate, self-plan, self-map their future in that an area of learning. The question again, are we ready? The answer is no, but then the change should happen from the system in higher education, but it must start again from the high schools and the primary school learning, so that when they come to us, they already know that we need to self-regulate and self-map our lives. Okay, and then again, lastly, we said it does foster active learning, where a learner is more of an active participant than a person who's going to wait for somebody to give them all the information. The good thing in terms of the institutional part of open pedagogy is it helps us increase visibility in terms of Unisa, for instance, as a brand, but also in terms of academics who are going to be creators of these courses and knowledge. It increases that visibility. It makes us to be an active role player in the national sphere and international sphere as well.
Thank you, Florence. Are you going to continue with the first question, or is somebody else doing that?
Yeah, somebody else will have to do the first. My part was to do the second part.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, colleagues. Colleagues, I will discuss the first part of this presentation. How do you foresee the future of Odell at Unisa? We indicated that we need to unpack the vision and the mission statement in terms of more futuristic things that can happen, and we need to make sure that our goals are well entrenched into the vision and mission statements. We need to ensure that the pedagogies, the Odell pedagogies, are aligned to the vision and mission statements. And the next point, we need to reevaluate our assets. Are we really using our assets, optimally to the benefit of the institution? Or, what other support do we need to maximize the optimal use of the resources that we currently have? Then we need to look at, with regard to technology, look at the accessibility of technology to the students. Do our students have enough network coverage, data bundles to access these assets. And how is technology viewed? Is it viewed as a benefit to the student, or what we are arguing is that technology, we should be reclaiming technology as one of the students' fundamental rights. And students should all be given laptops and data bundles. And it shouldn't be like, seen as a benefit, but rather as a right. We have the human resource strength, but we felt that in terms of, supporting these, the human resource, we need more technical and technological support to ensure that the human resources are optimally utilized there as well. With regard to the students' perspectives, we found, we asked the question, how empowered are our students for the online platform? Here we found that we need to ensure that our students are continually supported to function effectively in the online learning platform. Although we have the first year experience module, signature module, it is there to help students to bridge the transition to the online platform, but we found that students need much more practical support on how to ensure the smooth, the seamless transition. Then we looked at the readiness of the staff. If we question how ready are our students for the online platform, on the other side, we need to question how ready are our staff, our academics for the online platform. And here again, we said that although we've got systems in place, the ICT systems and so forth, but we found that the ICT, the systems are not easily accessible for support. We're also saying that Unisa, in terms of openness, Unisa is subscribing to curriculum transformation goals and pillars. And here we are saying that in doing so, we are aiming to ensure that the curriculum is responsive to not only the local, but also the international needs. So these are aspects that we covered with regard to, in terms of how do you foresee the future of Odell at Unisa. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. Group 4, excellent presentation also. There's so much there to pick up on. I would like to comment on something that you have mentioned several times, not only group 4, but also previous groups, which is the readiness aspect. Quite a few of you have asked, are we ready? Is the staff ready? Are the students ready? So this is something really to think in terms of developing a strategy for the future, for revisiting the current strategy and revising the strategy for the future in order to put in place all the training and reflections and technologies necessary. It's actually a group of things that are needed. Not only technology, but also methods, learning approaches, teaching approaches that needs to be perhaps revisited, and not assuming that all students, just because they are younger, that they know how to use technology for the benefit of learning and that they are already self-regulated. No, because there is the point of self-regulation, discipline for studying, and then also the command of technology. And there is sometimes this is not always a very easy aspect to put together and combine for students, so we sometimes assume they are younger and they master technology, but this may be for their purposes and not necessarily for learning. So student empowerment was something else very much mentioned. That is something that needs to be looking to at all times. So thank you very much, group 4, and we'll move on to group 5, please. 10 minutes for you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And a warm invitation to all of my other group members. If I miss something, please feel free to jump right in and add. So in our group, we felt that we had a lot of opportunities that perhaps that we could take advantage of. Yes, it is about learning theories such as behaviorism, but it's also about curriculum theory such as connectivist approaches. And in this new space, perhaps what we can do is take advantage of different ways of doing things, thinking about different ways of how we deal with information and materials. I think the general feeling in the group was that Unisa has been very much a print-based organization, and even though that we've been dabbling in blended models and things like that, it's been very much still paper under glass. So what we were very excited about is, because we are moving to a new learning management system, namely Moodle, that perhaps as teachers we would have more control over what it is that we can do. And this brought up a lot of questions for us in terms of how much the system has been driving the teaching. So Sakai has got many, many features that we don't necessarily have access to as teachers. And this was something that came up amongst various group members. We also felt that it gives us an opportunity not to fit into one box, because traditionally Unisa has had one way of doing things. So this would be applicable to all content areas. So for example, we are very scheduling driven. You will have this done by the 1st of June, you will have this done by this time, and you will have that done by this time. Very, very often things are done at least a year in advance, which means that whatever happens in that year, it's very difficult to change things once your tutorial letters are written, for example. And it's just that whole idea about you can't necessarily fight the system, so you try and work with the system. So we felt that perhaps in terms of openness, we could perhaps be a little bit more flexible in terms of how we do things, and this would bring us to autonomy. We also felt that if we have to start to think about ICT and the role that they have played, our ICT systems have not necessarily changed as fast as the landscape has changed, which means we have been a little bit on the back foot. We spoke in our group, for example, why is it that Unisa has not experimented with online assessments way before COVID? For what reason have we not done that? Why are we being so reactive as opposed to proactive in terms of how we think about things and how we go forward? We felt that we had unbelievable human capital within our organization that we can really leverage in perhaps a smarter way to map and go forward. We also felt that in terms of openness, that we could be a little bit more nuanced, not in terms of just what the students need, but also in terms of what the lecturer needs. But this brought us to what Group 1 also said, the role of collaboration. Sometimes it is very easy to be in a silo. It's very easy to it's very difficult to even collaborate within one college, let alone across colleges. And we just felt that this informal sharing, Group 1 mentioned community of practices. We didn't necessarily mention that, but what we did mention was brown bag events, where there's this informal sharing where people can reflect on what they've done and how they've done it, and perhaps help us to not have to hit our head against the wall because somebody else has already done that. But we also felt it was very, very important that when we think about technology and we think about leveraging technology in a meaningful way, that it really needs to be value added. We shouldn't just be engaging with technology and with all of these different really nifty things just because we can. We really do need to be thoughtful in terms of what is needed, what is required, and this is very context specific, not only in terms of our students, but also in terms of the areas that we are working in. Just with regard to micro-credentials, we felt that universities would never fully be replaced, but there is definitely a role that micro-credentials can play, especially in terms of short learning programs, up-to-date add-ons that is happening. I mean, it is very difficult to change university courses overnight. sometimes just to put a qualification on the books takes at least 18 months, and a lot can happen in 18 months, as COVID has taught us. So there's definitely a role in terms of micro-credentials in order to help perhaps upskill in a different way. And of course, if as a nation, we want to build lifelong learners, and this is a key way that we can actually facilitate that. But what it would require is establishing broader networks in terms of really knowing what is going on in our industries and what is going on in the areas that we are skilling our students to become a part of. We also spoke just in terms of badges and CPD, the role that CPD can play in terms of the badges that they can give. The discussion in our group was, if we are thinking about open, we definitely need a little bit more training in terms of understanding the practicalities. I think in theory, sometimes it's easy to read up. It's less probably in your face in terms of practically how can I go about this in the best possible way, I think is probably the key here. Because I think we can all sort of like figure it out, but we might be taking the long route to Cape Town as opposed to the fastest direct route. And then, of course, how do we design this openness? So just the practical, how do we design? How do we train? How do we train somebody? How do we find those champions, for example, within the organization that can really take a lead? Group 5, I think I've said it all. Is there anything else? Did I miss something?
No, I think you've covered everything that we discussed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Group 5. Wonderful things shared. You've talked about curriculum, the need for curriculum to evolve, the ICT systems to follow, no? You talked about autonomy, you talked about the informal sharing, you talked about students and lecturers, but I would also like to ask you to think of the community as well. I remember a university in Brazil, just to give you an example, they were exploring opening up courses as OER. So this is not necessarily a MOOC, they were just courses online. And they created summer courses and they asked the students to invite their immediate family and friends and the community around them to take part on those open courses. So they were transferring the knowledge from the university to the community, and that's an example of how openness can be very beneficial and how to teach with OER, no? To take this knowledge produced beyond the university and beyond the students into the community. That was very beautiful, and the courses are actually fully booked throughout the summer, so then they repeated for the winter, and this became a common practice in this university in Brazil. Just to give you an example, no, of a country that has similar challenges as South Africa does. Okay, in the last, sorry, then just a parenthesis, I love when you mentioned the long route to Cape Town. With your permission, I'm going to use that in my vocabulary because I like the analogy you're making in there, not to take the long route to Cape Town. Okay, colleagues, so I now will propose that we still carry on here sharing as a group now with the open mic. Okay, I will share my screen with you because I have a couple of questions to propose that we discuss with the open mic. Let me see how I can share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see my screen. Can you?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So we are about to finish to end the day, and I did ask you to think about, I proposed a couple of activities, let's say, last Friday. I'm not sure if you had a chance to have a look at the resources in the folder. I know it was a very short time between workshops, so probably did not. But in any case, I proposed two things, I propose that if you had a chance to go through that report, that is those guidelines on openness for academics, practical guidelines on open education for academics, and to complete the self-reflection specifically for the pedagogy dimension, because the focus of this workshop is a zoom into pedagogy. So I do not know if anyone has done that, but in case you have, it would be brilliant if you could share your experience on your self-reflection on open pedagogies, right? As proposed specifically by that report. And the second thing that I asked if you had a chance to do was to have a look at the video I gave you on peer instruction. And the idea here was really to highlight the difference between methodologies and techniques for teaching that have openness as something endogenous, like using open data, open science, project-based learning can be or not be. Some activities really like micro-credentialing, when you're using that as a methodology, look, it can be seen in different ways. It can be seen as a strategy, it can be seen as a methodology, it can be seen as a business model, as someone suggested. So it depends on our point of view. But some learning, teaching and learning methodologies have this openness endogenous to them, and some others we would have perhaps to think of how to add this level of openness to enable sharing, for example. So the peer instruction is one of those techniques that perhaps we would need to think of how to add a level of openness to this activity. And considering the scenario in Unisa, that's challenging, particularly for the ones that have 20K students in a module. So for the next 10 minutes or even a little bit less, I just would like to ask if any of you have the opportunity to look into either of these two things, either the video or the self-reflection, and whether you could share something with us, please. Can you pick up the phone and perhaps the microphone, and perhaps share your experience? Nobody? No problem.
Hi, it's Suri again. Can I talk?
Please, yes, please.
Okay. Look, what we do in our module in terms of educational practices and teaching, in the one module is that you are designated certain units of the module. So obviously we each have our own teaching philosophies and practices. And what we do is by engaging those students in those activities, then the peers get a view or a window into how we approach the topic, and it gives you some kind of autonomy, but at the same time collaboration and sharing towards the summative assessment. The other thing is that even with the e-tutors that we have for the bigger modules, there is collaboration across there because we draw up a schedule for them, but leave them to their own devices within the framework of the e-tutoring policy and targets and so on. But they have some kind of exchange or independence on that. But sometimes that becomes problematic because obviously I'm very key on the tuition practices, and people are employed on e-tutor much on the expertise rather than the tuition. So you have differing and wider gaps in how that methodologies work in the face of the community of practice.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for sharing your experience. Anyone else?
Hi, Andrea. I must be honest, when I started to look at the framework, for me, it was like playing darts. And if I can explain, it was like hit or miss. I think that there are some things that we are doing relatively okay at in terms of the definitions. And then there are some things that we really need to do a little bit better. For example, in our college, and we've also got the Commonwealth Chair for Open Educational Resources that's doing phenomenal work in terms of pushing how do we think about open educational resources, how do we do this, how can we really leverage this optimally. I use open educational resources in my research methodology module specifically that I teach. But when I looked at all of the indicators and the checklists, I thought, well, actually, there might be a couple of things that I could really do better. Even in terms of the pedagogy and how we think about openness and the technologies that I'm using, I do like to experiment a bit. But like I say, what has been nice in terms of looking at this and where I am at as an academic, it's like, okay, well, there are some things I'm doing and there are some things that I could definitely do better.
Thanks very much for sharing your experience with having a look at the framework. As I said before, I think that any framework has exactly this role, of prompting reflection. It's not to be seen as something closed or the ultimate goal that you have all to head towards, but something that will prompt reflection, that will perhaps be the basis for adaptation so that we can adapt the framework to our own contexts and needs. So it's interesting. It's interesting that you are saying that. The idea is exactly that. How can we see ourselves in the statements provided by the framework, and perhaps gather some other ideas from the framework, or perhaps even add new ideas to the framework, So thank you very much for your comment. I'd like to go back to the peer instruction a little bit more, because I understand this is a bit challenging to be able to promote collaboration between students, among students, beyond the discussion forum when you have such a high number of students. So I'd like to ask you, what's the role of mobile phones for you? Can people call each other? Could students working in smaller groups in which they have peers assigned and have their phone numbers shared in order to be able to do some collaborative instruction, peer instruction with one another without having necessarily to go through the LMS? This is actually a question. Is there any possibility to use a common phone line for prompting more collaboration beyond the discussion forum?
So we've got Elna and Suri Sander.
Please go.
Okay, what we found was in the discussion forum on the module site, there was a kind of a barrier that was created when students were requesting to create a WhatsApp group where they have their own group conversations. So what we did to resolve that was to create one of the folders to be subtopics to be WhatsApp groups, and they can do that in their own time, but the content related queries and discussions were then divided into assignment 1, assignment 2, or general, and we subcategorized it, and therefore it becomes more focused. So I don't know if that is what you're talking about, because the students need their social presence.
Correct.
Exactly. And that is when we found that they're more cohesive. But there is also the challenge that, the issue of working in groups sometimes leads to plagiarism. And that is a serious issue.
Yeah.
Because they cannot draw the line between group work and individual responses.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing this. But I think that when I'm talking about peer instruction here, I'm not really talking about assignments done collaboratively, assignments that will be marked, that then will be subject to plagiarism. I'm really talking about what the technique implies, which is just conversations, open conversation where the students can learn from one another, and learn from one another and improve their understanding of certain topics, but of course, sometimes openness in that sense, particularly if we are using social media, would also need some level of guidance, so some sorts of openness also need guidance in order to be effective, so you are absolutely right when you talk about you said assignment, but I would think at least giving tasks to students if they are to meet via WhatsApp, via Skype, or even via a virtual open room offered by the LMS, what sorts of tasks are expected from them out of this open collaboration opportunity. So thank you. And I think we could move to the final question, which is an overall reflection on the workshop day 1 and day 2. And perhaps, yes?
Can I say something?
Please.
I don't think you are seeing our hands. Yeah, I wanted to share my experience in terms of the use of mobile communication from student to student. I'm having one of the big module in our department, up to enrollment of almost close to 4,000 per semester. And it was when I realized that students have a way of communicating away from you as a lecturer. They have their own WhatsApp groups where they share, they ask each other questions, and others will respond to those questions. And they also have Telegram where they do the same thing. They share questions to say, how do you understand this? And then the other student will then respond to that. The only hiccup that I've seen in that, because I'm part of their social media, not as an active participant, but as an observer, is the issue of plagiarism. Then I'm there literally to guide them to say, you can't do this. You can only do this. When you do this, you're not helping your fellow student to learn and all that. But the issue, the only challenge is the issue of plagiarism. And what I like with the Telegram group is during exam time, that Telegram group, they make it unavailable to students. Because if they do, they will just copy from each other. With assignments, they literally sometimes take my assignment questions and put there and say, give me the answer. And they give each other answers. That's the only hiccup, is the issue of plagiarism, but the students are communicating without us being aware that they are literally collaborating. The issue of using my Unisa and discussion forum, I don't think it's working for students at the moment.
Thank you, Florence, right? For sharing your experience. I so wanted to hear from you how you go around this. And it's interesting that you say, well, both of you mentioned plagiarism. Yes, now I understand what you mean. So you have to take the Telegram offline during the exams. Okay, understandable. Anyone else to say anything about it?
Yes. It's Graham. In one of I've just completed my master's degree where I've used a mobile app to augment a mentorship for Will for students that are requiring a mentorship in the field. And with the shortage of mentors, mobile apps, I developed a mobile app for the use of by students. And that was a very good collaborative tool. The students got together as a group, and all the information was linked via the app to YouTube channels and to other relevant sites. So the idea was that the students were working as a group and facilitated with the app. And yeah, that use of the phone was a very good one. The only shortcoming was that the app needed to be online, the one that I developed, but an offline version would have been a lot more effective for the students to use. especially in the fields where the connectivity was poor.
Thank you, Graham, for sharing your experience. And this is the sort of things that having an open space to share experiments and like that, would be great for everyone to see what's going on in other parts of the university. So thank you very much for showing your experience. And moving to the last question, which is actually more of a call for reflection so that we can close the day, and I'll hand over to Unisa, to Denzel to close the day for us. What are your overall reflections on the past 2 days, but particularly one key message on actions or an action for the future that you see very important that we take from these 2 days? Open mic.
From my side, the more I learn about open pedagogies, the more I have questions. And one of the questions that I have is, as a university, we need to be economically sound. And when we make these to be open, like for instance, I'm talking about Telegram. When I go to the file of that Telegram, the students have posted almost everything, textbook, everything is there. All the question papers are on the Telegram. When we now go to open, what about the benefits, the financial income of the institution? Because then people can learn without literally having us check. Will we still maintain the economical soundness of the running of the institution? That's one of the reflections that I have the more I learn about open pedagogies.
Florence, thank you ever so much. I didn't want to jump in, but I feel compelled to do so because it's extremely relevant what you say. And many people think about openness. Some people are against having a business model for openness. Other things are totally pro. And I personally think there should be. But one of the things to think about is that what is it that the university offers? What's the value of the service provided by the university that goes beyond content? Because what you say they're sharing is content in Telegram, textbooks, etc. The university offers the teaching and learning aspect. So that's the richness of the methodology. And that's why you have to think of yourselves as the group that is responsible for teaching, for pushing forward methodologies, as the richness, the heart, the center of the university, because that's the difference. Content you can find anywhere. The mediation of teaching you cannot. So the better Unisa does it, the more valuable will be Unisa for the student, right? And for the community in general. And the other thing is that Unisa also gives qualifications, and qualifications that are valuable in the market, in the job market, cannot be found every time in the open. So that's also another benefit. The certificate, the diploma, plus the community offers the values it shares. So I think this question of economic soundness is relevant. But we need to be, in order to be able to tackle that question, we need really to think of the value that we are offering as a university to everyone, to the student and to the community. Okay, open mic again, please.
Hey, Andrea. Hello, everyone. I'm so sorry that I'm talking so much. I'm being so verbose. It's a Monday. I think probably by Wednesday, I'll be running out of all of my words. I think for me, it is how do we take this forward? Does this mean that our small group will become the community of practice? So I think that all of us have got some ideas, and I think all of the groups have mentioned how can we informally support each other. And that would be my question, just from the 2 days. It's like, how do we practically, as a group, perhaps move forward as a community of practice.
Thank you. Anyone else, or do we head for closure?
Hi, it's Kerry here. I think we need to discuss Vanessa's question just a little bit before we go off, is in terms of continuity, and we've sparked some interest now, and yes, how do we fit it into the different schedules and the different daytime demands on each of us in our place at Unisa?
Fine. Anyone wants to share some ideas on how to move from here?
Thanks, Andrea. Maybe I can just add quickly. Colleagues, you would note that from the first day when Prof. Marshile did his presentation. So one of the outputs of this 2 days, and I'm so glad that we got to this point without actually needing to lead colleagues to this point, that one of the outcomes of this 2 days is to develop a open education strategy stroke policy for the institution. Now, why I'm saying open education as opposed to an open education resource, you recall that when we spoke earlier, and also when Andrea echoed some of these comments, that open education is much more broader. And we want a policy that speaks to the openness of the university, but touches across multiple facets in the institution. And so the outcome of this 2 days is to drive ourselves towards thinking of a policy or a strategy that can lead the institution in the next 5 years towards becoming much more open and keeping the trends with open education. Now, one of the things, colleagues, you will know that at Unisa, if we don't have a policy or a strategy, and as much as these things are on paper, there's no point of going back and reflecting of when did we say these things, what is the way forward, how do we plan these things. And this is why that policy or strategy becomes so critical for us in developing it in response to some of the critical questions that we've asked now. And the idea here, colleagues, is that we've now set together quite a group of, and remember, the people in this group have been strategically identified by colleges to speak on behalf of them, by colleges that these are the interests that they have. So the idea here is that we now have a wide enough working group that we can consolidate some of these ideas and plot the way forward in what we have. And this is why when I sent out the invitation, I specifically asked for colleges to give us representation so that we can have a more inclusive group on this platform. So the idea here, colleagues, is that you will now form part of a working group that will start to develop the strategy and the policy of open education at Unisa, which we will now think about more strategically of putting timelines of when we can pass it forward towards for review by the different colleges and then towards Senate tuition for approval. So that's the next step for us, is to create a document that drives the agenda at Unisa with a plot for the next 5 years. Thanks, colleagues.
Thanks very much, Denzil, for sharing some actions for the future. No. Okay, so I think that from my side, I will close the day, first of all, by thanking you a lot for giving me the opportunity to share this construction of knowledge with you, because we shared a lot of information. You are a fantastic group to work with. So thank you, everyone, for your active participation, for your interest. In case you want to stay in touch with me, please do so. Here's my email for you. You can email me at any time, okay? And it will be a real honor for me to be able to keep on collaborating with you. So thank you very much from my side. And I pass again the word to Unisa for closure.
Thanks, Andrea. I think before I round up, let me invite Ingrid to do the vote of thanks, and I'll round up after. Ingrid?
Thank you, Denzil, and thank you, Andrea. I even put my camera on for this occasion. I know you like cameras on. I do want to say thank you very much for this very informative workshop today. You started us wrapping up, sort of reminding us about what happened on Friday. and really asking us questions that should lead us to thinking very deeply about what we do. And I think for me, and the possibilities of what open collaboration, open pedagogies, micro-credentialing, all can have for Unisa and for our own teaching practice. I think really what struck me though, and something that I've been really struggling with my own teaching, both at Unisa and previously when I was at a contact university, is this question that you posed to us at the end is, what is the university for? What value do we add beyond content, beyond knowledge? Because knowledge is everywhere. Sometimes it's good knowledge, sometimes it's bad knowledge. And what is it that we as university lecturers have to do to make our students think beyond the content? And I think if we get that right, it also speaks to open pedagogies, the type of assignments we asked, and our entire practice as universities. So I want to thank you for posing that question, and thank you for a really stimulating two-day workshop. And we hope that we can chat and collaborate again. Thank you so much. Denzel, back over to you.
Thanks, Ingrid. Yes, so let me start just as we round up. So thanks, Andrea, once again. You've been amazing over these two-day workshops and the very first presentation that we had. I think when you received the outline, you clearly knew exactly how to deliver this and what we need at Unisa. And we appreciate that so much, especially considering the fact that we really pressed you for time and to get onto this. And you've delivered a remarkable 2 days workshop for us. And I think you leave us at Unisa with exactly what we said at the very beginning. I remember we were conversing that we need a mindset shift. And I think that in this past 2 days, you've given us that mindset shift, but strategically and benchmarking it internationally as well. And for that, we are much, much appreciative. We also thank you for taking the time of 4 hours a day sometimes. And we know you have a little baby as well, and that can be quite demanding. We appreciate that. We don't take that for granted, Andrea. And I may also say to the colleagues that while we see Andrea for these 2 days, Andrea has also been behind the scenes working with the group, and she's been a few days working with them as well and engaging with them. So it's not just the 4 hours. Andrea dedicated much, much more time forward to this. So thank you very much, Andrea. You've been an asset to Unisa, and we appreciate this. And we know that this is just, and I said this before, this is just the start of much, much more for the collaboration. I think you've become so key to us where we want to go, that you've definitely, I see yourself as partnering us strategically and driving the agenda with Unisa. So thank you very much for that, Andrea. Colleagues, I also want to quickly thank you for attending these 2 days. You've been remarkable over these 2 days. I hope that you enjoy this new format of us engaging with breakaway groups and the online platform. You know, we never knew how much this would work and whether it would work well, but it worked well. So thank you very much, colleagues. We've got a good mixture from different support departments, regions, and colleges, and I think that gave us the richness that we needed in this conversation and part of the stakeholder discussions. So thank you very much, colleagues, for committing for the 2 days. We don't take you for granted. We know that your time is also precious, so we really appreciate that. So thank you very, very much. I also at last want to thank the ADOV team, the team members that have been behind the scenes and working with this right from the beginning of February, engaging with us. So thank you very much, colleagues, for the ADOV team, especially Richard for doing the technical support, and as well as Lydia for doing the admin part specifically for these workshops. Thank you very much, colleagues, and Andrea, and we have Ingrid, we have Ingrid, Vanessa, and Salosh, and we also got some new members who will introduce a little later that have joined the team as well. So thank you very much, colleagues. You all have contributed strategically to this, and I think we all can rest assured and say that we've had a prosperous workshop that we can say we all went back with enough food for thought for the next month or so to engage us with it. So as I promised, colleagues, we will not stop the conversation here. So you'll be hearing much more from us so that we keep the momentum of this. Thank you very much once again, and I wish you all a blessed afternoon, a blessed week ahead, and thank you. So once again, Andrea, thank you as well. Thank you, colleagues, and God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Thanks, Andrea. Have an awesome day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.